Today on our 2015 Ford F250 Super Duty, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 Ultimate Air Helper Springs with internal jounce bumpers for the rear axle. These are what our airbags are going to look like installed. Now that they're in place, these are going to help take some of that strain off of our factory suspension. They have a load rating of 5,000 pounds. Now keep in mind that's not going to increase your truck's weight capacity. It's just going to help your truck handle it better. But it's always a good idea to check with your owner's manual to see how much weight your truck can take. What sets these apart from many of the other ones on the market is you can use these with gooseneck and fifth wheel hitches. They're also adjustable, but that does include some maintenance as far as checking the pressure when you have a temperature drop, for example. You'll notice how unstable and unsettled the suspension is without the airbags installed. And you'll notice without the airbags installed how much suspension travel we don't have. With the airbags installed, you can see how much less jouncing and jarring there is going on. That's because the suspension is able to do its job properly with having the weight being supported by the airbags. This will give us much more handling and braking ability with the airbags installed, giving us the safety that we need when we're towing a heavy load or have a lot of weight in the back of our vehicle. I'm going to take a measurement with the factory suspension and the bed empty. That way we can compare it to once we have our airbags installed to see what the difference will be. We're going to be sitting right at about 41.5 inches right to this line. Same thing in the front. We'll take our measurement and we're right at 41 inches. Now we've put a significant amount of weight in the bed of the truck. It's about 300 gallons of water. We'll take the same measurements with our factory suspension. Now with all this weight, we're down to 39.25. Here in the front, take the same measurement. And we're right over 41 inches. So what this means is, with all the weight in the bed of the truck, your headlights are going to point higher up, possibly into other motorists' eyes, and you're going to lose visibility as well because you don't need to see in the air, you need to see the road. It's also going to wear your front tires out faster because the contact pattern on the road isn't as flat as it should be. You're also going to lose braking performance and just overall handling performance. To begin our install, we went ahead and removed our spare tire. Now you don't have to, but it will help because we'll have some more room. For our next step, we actually need to remove this factory jounce bumper. Now there's one 15mm nut that's going to be holding it on. As far as the wiring goes, you can either unplug it, zip tie it up out of the way, or just work around it, whatever is easier for you. Now if the jounce bumper wants to spin on you, if your nut is really rusty, you can have a friend get some big channel locks and hold the bumper down. That way it won't spin when I'm turning the nut. So I'd just like to point out, on the driver's side, if you have an aftermarket hitch in the bed of your truck, you may or may not have to take off that side frame plate. And that's because our airbag bracketry is going to share some of the same attachment points as our hitch in the truck. Now they're all going to be a little bit different, so you may have to take it off, you might not. You might have to just loosen it up to give you a little bit of room, but I just like to point that out. We're going to first start by taking our driver's side upper brace and our driver's side upper bracket. Now these are going to go together like this. So we want this flat side here to be on the side of the slower portion with the support and the square for a carriage bolt. That's how you're going to want it to go. Now we're going to loosely assemble these by using a carriage bolt that'll come in from the bottom like that. Then we're going to take a flat washer And finally, a nylon lock nut. And like I said earlier, just get it loosely hand tight. We're going to repeat that for this hole. Now we can take our spacer and make sure the hole that's offset in the center, the edge it's closest to, we're going to make sure that's facing our two carriage bolts like this. Now we're going to loosely secure that with another carriage bolt up from the bottom. And as you can see, it has a kind of a recessed area drilled out for this carriage bolt. And then we're going to take a locking flange nut and just barely put it on like that. So now we can loosely assemble all these brackets to the top of our airbag. You know it's the top of the airbag because there will be 3 threaded holes. Now we'll take our roll plate. This large hole will go over the inflation opening. You can line all 3 of them up. Now we can take all of our upper brackets, get them lined up. Now we're going to loosely secure them together with these fine thread bolts, a lock washer and a flat washer. We'll drop those in. We're going to take our swivel air fitting and thread it into the top of the bag. Now we're going to put this in until it is snug by hand and then turn it down an extra 1.5 turns with the wrench. Now we can flip everything over and start putting together the bottom of the bag. We're first going to take the roll plate and line it up on the bag. Now this larger hole, that's going to go around this cutout in the sticker. Let's set that like that. Now we can take our lower bracket main plate and our lower bracket cup. What we're going to do is line this hole up with this slot in the center on our main plate. Now we're going to want to make sure, if I'm holding it flat like that, that these tabs are pointing up if you're looking straight down at it. We will take a carriage bolt, drop that through and hold it in place while we flip it over. Then on the back side, take a washer and a lock nut and get that snugged up. So now with our bottom main plate in our hand, what we're going to do is take our long carriage bolts and put those from the bottom up into the square holes on the sides of our cup. Now we're going to put this on our air spring. However, we want to make sure that these tabs are pointing up and they're on the same side as this part of the front bracket. What we're going to do is line up these recessed holes with the holes in our airbag. Once we have them lined up, we can loosely install our flat bolts with an Allen key head. This can be kind of tricky to hold everything straight while you're doing this. Just take your time and you'll get it. Now we can torque down the hardware that's actually holding our airbag to the bracket. You can find that torque spec in your instructions. For the bolts on top of the airbag, the ones I'm doing now, you're going to use a 9/16 socket. Now that everything is pre-assembled, this is what it's supposed to look like. As you can see, this face on our upper bracket lines up with this flat face on our bottom bracket, and that's the way it should be. We're going to use a pull jack to put pressure up on the driver's side of the truck. That way it'll lift everything up and give us a little more room to snake our airbag inside. Now you can use a floor jack and a block of wood, or whatever you might have handy to do this. Now we're going to put our whole airbag in assembly into place. Before we do that, we're actually going to remove this flange nut, because this stud here is actually going to go into the hole where our factory jounce bumper bolt was going through. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this into place. This is what it's going to look like just resting in place. Now as you can see, this upper bracket is going to be sitting pretty much flat against the inside of our frame. And it comes down, our cup should be relatively lined up with this part of our rear end. Now one thing I do want to point out, that the carriage bolt here, the one closest to the back of the truck, when you're putting it in, it's going to want to come over the brake line and this wire here. What you want to do is make sure that this is going to run in between the axle tube and the brake line, just like this. Now just to loosely hold our airbag assembly in place, this nut here, that's the flange nut that we removed off the stud, but right before we put it in, that's actually going to go up through that hole in the frame that our factory jounce bumper was attached to. We're going to use this bolt, 2 flat washers, and this thin nylon lock nut to help attach our upper plate to the frame. We have our bolt and 1 flat washer. We're going to put it right through this opening here towards the rear of the truck. We'll slide right through the frame. On the other side, we'll take our flat washer and our lock nut, get that loosely installed. Now we can take either the large bolt that came with our kit, or if we had an aftermarket hitch installed, the bolt that we removed, we can take that and secure it to our upper bracket just like this. From there, we went ahead and tightened everything down. Now we started with our bolts on our upper bracket to the frame. Then we came and tightened up our carriage bolts on our upper bracket. And then from there, we went ahead and centered our cup and went around with a 1/2-inch wrench and tightened our lock nut on the back side. We then took this bracket here that goes around our axle tube, also called the clamp bar, ran that up over our long carriage bolts and tightened those down evenly all the way up until the desired torque spec. We then took our bail clamp, wrapped it around our leaf spring U-bolts, and we want to get it in the hole that's the highest up. So in our case, we were able to use the very top hole, and once again tighten both sides down evenly until we achieve our spec. Now we're going to repeat that exact same process for the other side, with the exception of our heat shield on our passenger side. There's going to be 2 worm clamps that we're going to connect together, and then on the heat shield itself there's going to be a tab that we're going to bend, and that's actually going to clamp the heat shield around our exhaust. With our airbags in place, we can then focus on running our air line. You're first going to need to determine where you want your inflation valves. We decided to go with right here along the bumper, kind of by the license plate area. Now wherever you pick, make sure whatever you're drilling into, there's going to be nothing behind that can get damaged. Here's what it looks like coming out of the back of our bumper. Now you can run it to the airbag, you just want to make sure to avoid any hot or moving parts or any excessive kinks or bends in our airline. So we followed some factory wiring, which is always a safe bet. then into the airbag fitting. Now it's very important that you get a nice clean cut on your airline, or you can have some issues down the road. It's supposed to look something like that. So to connect our airline to our fitting coming off the airbag, you simply just push firmly into the fitting, and then you give it a tug back to make sure it's fully seated and doesn't come out. Now the only difference between the two sides is the passenger side. It's actually going to use a piece of sheathing that's going to go over the airline. That way it's going to help protect it from any heat from the exhaust. So don't forget to put that on and place it over the airline that's closest to the exhaust. On the passenger side, we routed it very similar, just from our airbag, along through the frame rail, down through here, and right into our bumper. Once everything is hooked up, you're going to want to test it. So we're going to put some air in the system and not only listen for any leaks, but we're going to spray everything down with some soapy water to make sure we don't see no bubbles. If we see bubbles, that means we're going to have a leak and we're going to have to address that appropriately. If you do see a leak, what you can do is remove the line from the fitting, recut it nice and clean, reinsert it, and test it. Now with our airbags installed and the same amount of weight in the bed of the truck, we'll go ahead and measure it and see what the difference is. So from the ground to the edge of the fender opening here is 41.5 inches. That's actually the same ride height that our factory suspension had without any weight in the bed of the truck. As far as the front goes, from the ground to the edge of the fender opening is 41 inches, so that's exactly what it was stock. So what this means is our headlights are going to be pointed directly at the road, and our front tires are going to have full contact with the pavement beneath. So that's going to help with our braking, handling, and steering, as well as tire life. And that'll do it for our look at and installation of Air Lift's LoadLifter 5000 Ultimate Air Helper Springs with internal jounce bumpers for the rear axle on our 2015 Ford F250 Super Duty.